After I graduated from high school, my father asked me if I felt any different, and I told him, nope. When I got married, he asked me the same thing, and again, I had the same answer. On December 10, 1998, my wife gave birth to a baby girl, and I was lucky enough to have my mom and dad right there at the hospital. Well, my dad started, and I knew what he was going to ask. This time, however, the answer was yes. Now there was someone in the world, the little girl I was holding, that I would throw myself in front of a bus for.
When I was a little girl, I had a teacher, and he would use these two wooden puppets named Little Tommy and Little Monica to put on these weekly puppet shows. One day, Little Tommy knocked Little Monica's head right off. This wasn't a part of the script, but the teacher went along with it, and he created this entire plot in which little Monica's body would yell, "I lost my head, give me back my head," and somehow her head would yell back, "I lost my body, give me back my body." But little Tommy thought this whole situation was too scary, so he ran off, leaving little Monica to connect her head and her body again, all by herself. The teacher considered gluing the broken puppet back together, but the whole incident was such a hit with all the giggling first graders that it actually became a part of the weekly routine. I thought this story was so funny when I was little, until the summer of 2015, when a boy much like little Tommy made me realize that Monica's situation was a lot more real than I ever thought it could be. That it is possible to lose your head, to lose your body, and then even when you feel that there's no one around to help you, to find them again. I want to try to tell this to you, not as an expert or a scientist, but simply as a young woman. I want to talk about sexual assault. At the beginning of this year, I had a conversation with a peer in which he tried to argue that rape culture doesn't exist. Rape culture can't exist because it's not like every man goes around wanting to rape every woman he sees. That is missing the point entirely. You see, rape culture is not simply about the direct action of rape, the correlation of cause and effect in which a person wants to rape someone, and so they rape someone. Rape culture starts with a joke you make about an exposed pair of legs just asking for trouble. It starts when you see your boss's hand reach out and touch your coworker, obviously making them uncomfortable, but you don't say anything about it. It's when all of these things become normalized to the extent that someone does think that bare legs are asking for something, or that your boss thinks it's okay to take his hand and reach out and touch your coworker again, and from there, we are launched into a vicious cycle of perpetuation and acceptance, where prevalence is turned into invisibility, where the dismembered puppet that we should find disturbing becomes just another part of the routine. So here are 3 of my own truths that I want to posit today. First, to perpetuate rape culture is to separate a person's body from the human being inside of it. Second, rape culture itself is so pervasive that we don't even notice it anymore. And third, my strongest weapon in fighting against it is through telling my story. That summer in 2015, I was drugged and sexually assaulted during a study abroad trip in China. What I realize now was that this assault didn't just entail the attacker objectifying my body in thirst for power and sex. It also entailed the twisted reverse. While he had looked at me as a neck to grab onto, an empty hole to fill through my disturbed conscience and choppy memory, I had also begun to dismember this boy's body into individual pieces that didn't conjoin to form a human. A hand up my skirt, a mouth spouting crude comments about my body, a pair of arms and a pair of legs on either side of me. There was no way that these parts, these floating limbs, could possibly be attached to a living, breathing person. In that moment, to me, we were both just soulless, lifeless puppets. For months after the incident, the nights were interrupted when I woke up gasping for breath or crying. The days were marked by panic attacks that were so severe that I would inadvertently hurt myself. On the day-to-day scheme of things, to perform the simplest tasks, I had to muster up every ounce of energy in my body. This body that I had grown to despise for its utter powerlessness, that I had begun to question if it was even my own, this body that I had disavowed and entirely lost. But slowly, piece by piece, my body began to return to me, and what came back first was my mouth.
I remember where I was when I got the phone call from China from our daughter. I could hear the hurt in her voice. I could hear how broken she was. She was in pieces, and she was all the way on the other side of the world. But if she had been right in front of me, I wouldn't have known what to do. I couldn't fix it.
The first person I told was my father, my mentor in life, the one I looked up to most, the person who taught me to be smart, stay safe, be brave. I was terrified that I would disappoint him because I hadn't been smart enough, safe enough, or brave enough, but I told him everything from start to finish, and it was the hardest, scariest, most terrible phone call I've ever made in my entire life. I remember what I said. Dad, I went out to a bar with my host sibling and some friends. I got home. I felt dizzier than I should have. While my host family slept, one of the boys came into my room and laid there next to me. He had seemed nice earlier that night, but I hadn't really talked to him. I couldn't even remember his name. Dad, there was something wrong with my body. I couldn't move. I don't remember it all, but I woke up next to an open condom wrapper on the bedside table and an ache between my legs. Dad, I'm so scared. I'm so scared. In that moment where I felt most alone, all my father had said to me over and over was, I'm here. I'm here. After weeks of therapy, I opened my mouth again. I told my closest friends, I told my teachers, I told everyone I cared about, and everyone who cared about me, and to this I was met by 3 responses that all broke my heart in different ways. The first response was of shock. I can't believe it, people would say. I can't believe that happened to you. But that's the thing. It is entirely believable that it happened to me because it happens to 1 out of every 5 women. And the second response, what we really have trouble believing is that the statistic includes the people closest to us. The second response only made me realize this further. It was the response of painful familiarity. They'd look me in the eyes. They'd peer into my heart. Me too, they would say. These bodiless statistics have faces. They have the faces of our mothers, our daughters, our neighbors, our friends, and behind every single one of these faces is a story of heartbreak and a story of growth. The third response I was fortunate enough to have only had to encounter once, but I realize for many people, it's the only response they ever get. It is that of doubt and that of blame. Why were you drinking with people you didn't know very well? Were you wearing provocative clothing? Were you flirting with him? Did you ever actually say no? It is responses like these that make it so hard to come forward and share these stories in the first place. I have a theory that these responses come from the inability to even begin to imagine what this experience is like, how powerless you feel in that terrible moment, how helpless, how weak, how utterly incapable. These responses come from the lack of understanding that sometimes it is easier to give in rather than to fight because it hurts a little bit less. It comes from not understanding that if you do give in, that doesn't make it your fault. It is never your fault. That is why we must keep sharing. That is why we must keep describing the horrors that we've seen and the hurt that we felt in vivid detail and painful honesty. We need to make people understand.
Someone much wiser than myself told me that a sexual assault is an initiation. You're a different person after it happens. Unlike other initiations, however, this one is performed by the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't think you can ever recover what is lost: trust, optimistic innocence. But you can find other things. In our daughter's case, her fragileness turned into strength, her anxiety into confidence, and maybe, the greatest of all, her confusion transformed into a quiet, abiding wisdom. Clara, if you had never been assaulted, you would have found these things in a healthy way. But you found strength, confidence, and wisdom in spite of being sexually assaulted.
I continued to rebuild myself. When I regained my eyes, it was because I allowed myself to step back from the horrors of my situation and noticed that along with the realization of the world's malignance, they were also opened to the capacity for human kindness found in the people that loved me. Late night phone calls when I woke up crying, talking me down from panic attacks when my vision tunneled and my lungs burned, holding me until I was convinced that I was safe and that I'd be all right. When I regained my ears, I was struck by the heartbreak of others who had stories of their own, but also by the hope in hearing that these others were now thriving. Like little Monica, I was putting myself back together, a piece at a time. I look back to my childhood, back to that first grade classroom, and wonder what would have happened if little Monica had said something. If she had turned to us and said, "I'm hurt." If she had turned to us and said, "I am scared," would all of her little first grade friends have blamed her for something little Tommy had done, or shrugged it off entirely? Or would we have made little Tommy own up to his mistakes and apologize? Would we have helped little Monica put herself back together? Would we have made sure that it never happened again? I'm not trying to naively oversimplify this terrifying, ageless issue into the straightforwardness of a first grade classroom. I don't mean to posit that it is even remotely easy to come forward and share these stories, or that the second that we do, suddenly the whole world is going to change. But I do think that when we find that bravery to come forward and address our pain, we are bringing forth a new sense of empathy to the issue that statistics just are not able to do. We are making it clear that we have been hurt, and the fact that we have been hurt is wrong. We are reconnecting our bodies back to who we are. Human beings, not empty shells or touted numbers. We are recovering what we had once lost.